Yo, what's good, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another Epic 7 How to Play. I know it's been a minute, but today we're talking about the character that no one calls by their real name, and that is the Archdemon's Shadow. I'm sure you guys all call her something completely different, Archdemon Mercedes, so on and so forth. If you've never seen one of these How to Play videos, I go super in depth and try to cover as much as I can about the character. I go over their stats, their skills, some possible endgame equipment builds, as well as some suggestions on who to pair them with in Guild Wars, World Arena, things like that, as well as give you the good matchups and the bad matchups. So, with the introduction out of the way, as always, let's move right on to Archdemon Mercedes stats. Archdemon Shadow, who you may hear me refer to as either Archdemon, Archdemon Mercedes, or A Meru throughout this video, is a dark mage of the Aquarius zodiac symbol. She shares the same stat line with Green Basar as well as Blue Luluka. Taking a closer look at her stats, she has 1,316 attack, 4,777 health, 108 speed, 715 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, 18% effectiveness, and no effect resistance. This stat line is nuts. It is well above average in every category except for two, which is speed, which is at 108, and that is basically around the average at this point in Epic 7's lifetime. So yeah, we can't really fault her for that. And the other is the low health total, which most mages have a low health total, so we'll give that a pass as well. It's within the acceptable range for the most part. But over 1,300 attack and over 715 defense here, that's nuts. Those are incredibly high and put her in the upper echelons of those statistics for most of the cast. So yeah, overall, really, really good stat line. When it comes to trivia, we've already talked about the voiceover artist for Archdemon Shadow in How to Play Mercedes, as they are exactly the same in both the English and Japanese dubs. As a bit of trivia though here now, if you haven't noticed, in the newest patch of Epic 7, they've finally included the voice actor or actress in the top right hand corner, and considering this is the screen I usually talk about it, I much appreciate this new feature. Archdemon's S1 is Touch of Chaos. You acquire one focus upon use. Before this move deals any damage, it has a 50 to 75% chance to seal the target for 2 turns. It will then attack with a 1x attack multiplier. Seal, which is the debuff that this gives, is unique to Archdemon Mercedes, at least as of the recording of this video. It disables passive skills of enemy heroes that are hit by it. Most of the best characters in Epic 7 are as good as they are due to their passives, including characters like Arbiter Vildred, Bellion, Fallen Cecilia, and even collab heroes like Rem. This skill is where Archdemon gets most of her value, and it is the primary reason to pick her. You could argue that Touch of Chaos is her signature skill. Archdemon's S2 is a passive skill called Twisted Power. It decreases the damage that she suffers from critical hits by 20 to 30% depending on Molagora. This damage reduction passive does not stack with other damage reduction passives. Additionally, when she uses her S1 skill Touch of Chaos, there is a 40% chance that she will activate the AoE attack Burst. If the target is sealed before using her Touch of Chaos move, the chance to activate Burst is doubled and increased to 80%. Burst is an AoE attack. You acquire one focus upon use, and it has a 0.6x multiplier. Do note, it also has a 1.3x POW multiplier. What this means is that the move will actually do more damage than the multipliers suggest, which means that we need less attack when gearing this hero than you would probably think. Additionally, the move has a 60% chance to blind all enemies for 1 turn before increasing the combat readiness of Archdemon Shadow by 25%. It's a nice AoE attack to have, but it doesn't do quite a ton of damage overall. That's fine though, because this move, when we talk about the counter build in the build section that you will most likely be playing her on, will proc a lot. This move, Burst, you will see this move fly half a dozen times or more in a given game, so we don't really care that the damage multiplier is relatively low on it. This adds up, and I think that is where the big misconception comes with this character. A lot of people don't think that Archdemon Shadow really does that much damage, and yes, she's not a heavy hitter, but she hits for, small damage quite a number of times. It's essentially like death by 1,000 cuts when you're playing this character, simply because of how often Burst will activate. Archdemon's S3 is Dissolution. It requires 5 focus to activate and consumes all focus upon activation. You acquire 5 souls when you activate this move. It is an AoE attack with a 1x attack multiplier. Additionally, it has a 45 to 70% chance, depending on Molagora, to defense break all enemies for 2 turns. In addition, you have a 75 to 100% chance to burn all enemies 2 times for 2 turns as well. After using Dissolution, Archdemon Shadow gets an extra turn, and this skill cannot trigger a counterattack. A lot of people are really disappointed in this S3 because you can't actually use it at the start of the fight, but I think it's a fine S3. It does average damage for an AoE attack, and now with the added utility of the defense break, I think it will attribute so greatly to the success of this character. That death by 1,000 cuts will basically be a lot more pronounced, I think, with that defense break. But overall, this has always been a fine skill. You use it when it's available because there really is no cost to you when you activate it. It can't be counterattacked. You get an extra turn anyway to be able to still seal and fire off burst as normal. So yeah, it's kind of like a, if you have it, use it, set it, kind of forget it move.
Guide me to the depths of your mind. I desire your flesh.
Archdemon's Soulburn is actually incredibly strong. It makes it so that the effect chance to seal on Touch of Chaos is increased by 100%, and due to her new buffs, it also now ignores effect resistance, guaranteeing that the character is going to land a seal, all at the cost of 10 souls. The reason you're playing Archdemon Shadow is usually to stuff a character's passive, making it useless and allowing you to easily pick up a win. Having a 10 soul burn that does that guaranteed makes this character a lot better in my opinion. Overall, I still think Archdemon is one of the most underrated heroes in Epic 7, and I really don't know why she doesn't see more play. Passives basically dominate the meta along with buffs, and having a character that on demand shuts down said passives makes her a really powerful character, to me at least, and a sleeper pick in quite a number of scenarios. When it comes to Molagora Priority, I personally would max Twisted Power first because, as we talked about in How to Play Senya, I'm a big fan of my characters being able to live longer so they can do their job and stay in the fight and produce more results for me. So for me, Twisted Power makes the most sense as the one that I would max first. However, I can see an argument for maxing S1, which is what I would max second. And that is because the seal is the primary reason to play the character. So having the highest amount of effect chance on it is super, super good. And obviously, you're going to be using this attack the most because we're most likely going to be on a counter build, and that's what we'll be talking about in the build section in just a second. So yeah, having a strong S1, obviously very, very important. And then finally, I would max Dissolution last because, as we just talked about, it's kind of like a if you have it, use it, set it, forget it move. You don't really care if this move does a ton of damage because everything else is really on the S1 and the S2. But if you really want to play this character long term, if you really like this character, there's not really a reason not to at least put some Molagoras in it for the effect chance and for the damage for when it's finally actually available. In my videos, you'll usually hear me talking about characters' passives and say it's where they get most of their strength. In almost every metagame so far across the game's life, the characters with the overpowered passives are usually the ones that sit atop the tier list. Archdemon's defining feature, her seal, completely invalidates many of the things that make those characters great. And I know what some of you who are watching this are thinking. If the seal mechanic is as good as I say it is, then why was this character not played more in the past? Well, my best guess is how the player base actually perceived this character in the beginning. They perceived her as not a strong character. For the original boss character in Epic 7, I think a lot of people were expecting Meru to be a heavy-hitting mage along the lines of a character like Spectre Tenebria. Seeing the damage that she does with each hit, though, doesn't exactly inspire confidence as a damage dealer. Yet, I'm here to tell you that she is actually a deceptively good damage dealer. And I'll explain that point now. Since she can't use her S3 Dissolution at the start of the match, you will naturally need to find a way to build up focus for her. No other set I feel like is going to give you more S1 and potential S2s than counter set. And with the sheer amount of AoEs that are in the format, those counters will translate to a high amount of S1s and S2s in a given game. While Archdemon's attacks may only hit for something like 800 to 1200 damage a piece, when you can generate a dozen or more of those attacks over the course of a few turns, that damage starts to add up considerably, and most players simply won't notice it unless they actually take a look at the endgame stat screen. Now let's factor in the rest of the things that make this character actually good. She has a passive as well as a high base defense that makes her very hard to kill. Also, Seal is more in demand now than ever as there are more powerful passives than there were a year ago. Even when facing characters that do not have passives, this character still has a ton of debuffs in their kit, such as the Blind on Burst, as well as the new defense break that was added to the S3 Dissolution. And that's before we talk about any potential stuns or strips that you can get from your artifact choice. She also has a big increase to the consistency of landing her seal, thanks to her most recent round of buffs. And her burst combo actually triggers much more frequently now, and along with certain artifacts that we'll talk about in a second, her damage output is overall much higher as a result. And it's for those reasons that I just talked about that I think you're starting to see more of Archdemon's face, at least on streams and higher end arena. When it comes to building Archdemon Shadow, there are two viable builds from what I've seen in my research as well as my own personal testing. They are both counter set builds, however, they differ slightly in terms of stats based entirely on which artifact you want to play the character on. The first build that I'm going to show you is one that has high effectiveness, and this is well suited for artifacts such as Abyssal Crown as well as Iella Violin. We're going to be on counter immunity because obviously counter set means we're slower and therefore more susceptible to debuffs. However, if you do not have immunity or simply just don't want to play it, hit set is a decent alternative since we really care about effectiveness on this build. Taking a look at the desired stats, we have 2700 attack. This is so that our burns on Dissolution deal decent damage as well as the increased damage floor from the S2 burst. Then we have 1700 defense and 15k HP. You can flip these numbers if you want and go 1500 defense and 17k HP depending on what gear you actually have. For most players, it is easier to get that 1700 or higher defense because of the character's innately high defensive stat. For speed, we want 200. You can go lower if this is too fast for you. I've seen 185 work in the past. I just see most Archdemons roughly centering around 200. Mine was around 200. My guildmates were around 200. A lot of streamers I've seen have been around 200, but I recognize that not everyone has the best gear sometimes, so they have to make cuts here or there, and I don't think that the speed is super important. So if you can only get like 180, 185, and the rest of the stats match up, that's fine. Obviously, we have 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage. We're not on a damage dealing build on this. For the effectiveness, we have 100% effectiveness. This is so that we have a good chance to land all of our debuffs and seal most of the damage dealers that we're going to be playing against. A lot of the characters that you will play that you want to seal don't build any effect resistance. So having 100% effectiveness gives you pretty much amazing odds against all of them, which is why we went for that number. When we take a look at the right side gear, I am on an HP percentage necklace, but you can be on a defense percentage necklace if you so choose. For the ring, I am on an HP percentage necklace to try and get the most amount of bulk, but depending on what you want out of the character, you can play defense percentage, attack percentage, or even effectiveness. For the boots, we're on speed. We want to at least take turns in a timely fashion. We do not want this character to be dirt slow. If she is a reasonable speed on counter set, those extra CR pushes from the S2 will make her zoom in, so we really want those boots. For the artifact, I have chosen to use Iella Violin because almost everyone has access to it thanks to Hall of Trials, and it is very easy to plus 30 this artifact. So therefore, it is the one that I'm using to represent the stats that I've chosen to go with here in this video. However, in my personal experience, I have found Abyssal Crown to be a much more impactful artifact on this build. Iella Violin is nice. It will remove immunity and other things and allow you to pave the way for more seals, which is cool. But I think that Abyssal Crown is still just one of the better artifacts in the game, and getting a clutch AoE stun on the S2 is game ending, which is why I really like it. If for some reason you don't have either of these, you could play Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. But if you wanted to really play Fairy Tale for a Nightmare on this character, I highly recommend building the second build that we'll be talking about after this one. Looking at the per piece average, we want something like 19% defense, 14% effectiveness, 10 speed, and then the rest is disseminated amongst health, attack, and other stats. The second build to talk about is a more damage-oriented build for those that want to get more out of their Archdemon Shadow, or you simply just want to play the artifact Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, thanks to its most recent round of changes. Taking a look at the primary sets, we're still on counter immunity, but if you don't have immunity set, you can use critical hit chance in the interim until you get something better. Looking at the desired stats, I bumped the attack up to 3,000 because we're going to be landing more critical hits on this build, so we want them to feel a little bit more impactful. We want her damage to feel a little bit more substantial. It also increases the damage on the burns on the S3. For defense, I've dropped it down to 1,500, although I really still feel like you want 1,700 defense here. The health is still 15k. Again, I still think you want the bulk stats exactly as they were the last time, where it's 1,700 defense, 15k HP, or 1,500 defense, 17k HP, depending on what you can actually get. I've just put it here as 15-15 because in my experience, when you try and go for the attack over 3k and try and have critical hit chance, it is a bit difficult to hit all the stats needed for this character. And I find that the bulk is usually where it suffers, and I really don't want the bulk to be the thing that suffers, because bulk on this character translates to extra damage. The longer you're alive, the more chances you have to counter, which means you have more chances to land S2s, you have more chances to land S3s, you have more Fairy Tale for a Nightmare true damage procs on the enemy team. You just do more the longer the character stays on the board. So don't skimp any lower than the stats that I have listed here if you can. 85% critical hit chance on this character, so that way we can do a substantial amount of damage. Like, we'll have the majority of our attacks be critical hits, so we'll get that extra 150% critical hit damage on the actual character. You can raise the critical hit damage on this at the expense of attack, but I find that it comes to be roughly the same. It might come out slightly ahead in the crit damage favor, but overall it's roughly the same, and I don't think you really need to mess with it too much. If you try and go much higher than 200% critical hit damage, I find you will impact either your speed, your crit hit chance, or, worst of all, your bulk. So I've really tried to just not go for that. If you somehow have a build that can go higher crit hit damage without impacting the stats that I have listed here, then by all means you should go for it. Taking a look at the right side, I'm on a crit chance necklace in order to make the actual stats work on this character. However, if you have really good critical hit chance pieces that give bulk, then you can go with like an HP percentage or defense percentage necklace. The ring that I'm on is on HP percentage, although again, you can go either defense percentage, attack percentage, or even something like effectiveness. If you just have like a crazy cracked out DPS ring on effectiveness, you could do that. I'm not playing any effectiveness on this build because it's largely for damage, but if you want a little bit and you just have that cracked out effectiveness ring, like I have a defense set effectiveness ring that has like 40% attack, you could do something like that if you so chose. I do want to give you guys the option, the flexibility, but damage should be the primary focus of this. Boots are still speed. Artifact is Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. Again, because of the buffs, it now does extra true damage. So when you have a character that is constantly AoE critting for decent damage, along with having extra AoE true damage procs, it does really add up, which is why I think it is the best artifact for this build. But you still can play Crown and Violin if you so choose. Taking a look at the per piece average, you want 16% HP, 13% defense, 10% attack, and 10 speed on each piece. So let's talk teammates for Meru. The first up is Troublemaker Crozet as well as Amelia. Both of these characters can add some survivability to your Archdemon as well as some cleanses, and most importantly, some clutch combat readiness pushing. Allowing your Archdemon to take turns earlier and more often means that you can get those clutch seals off as well as those game-winning S3s more often. I also have Fairy Tale Tenebria here, but she's basically a catch-all for any character that can remove immunity from the enemy team and apply unbuffable. There are a lot of them these days, things like Angel of Light Angelica and Briar Witch Issaria. Basically, as long as the enemy has unbuffable and can't have immunity, you have free reign to basically land your seals, land your blinds, land your defense breaks, and that's awesome. Speaking of awesome, Researcher Carrot is one of the best Guild War offense teammates to pair your Archdemon with. I think these two pair super well together. Carrot can hold it to Hagel's Ancient Book, which will not only up her own damage, but allow you to land a guaranteed seal at the start of a fight, which will allow you to stack up the S3 faster. The S3 on Archdemon gives a ton of burns, which Carrot can then cash in on. These two are really good. They can play super long because they're super tanky. And on top of that, again, they have that crazy synergy between their kits, which can allow you to burst down specific heroes. So I like these two a lot together, again, especially in Guild Wars. Finally, we have to talk about Conqueror Lilius, the newest ML 5-star. Obviously, this character is just insane. Overall, Vigor is incredibly powerful with Archdemon. You get stronger damage on your moves. You get more defense in order to survive longer and get off more S3s in a game. And again, the S1 on Lilius will allow you to tag in the Archdemon to get more seals, more S2s, more S3s. The characters just complement each other incredibly well. With her most recent round of buffs and this character running everywhere, I think that is why you're starting to see Archdemon see an uptick in play. Most, but not all, of the characters with S2 passives that you can seal are good matchups for Archdemon Shadow. I do want to spend this section talking about the characters that you're most likely going to play her against. First up is the trio of Tempest Cern, Spirit Eye Celine, and Arbiter Vildred. All three of these characters are built paper thin with a ton of damage because they're trying to leverage the survivability that their S2 passives gives them. If you can get off an early seal, these characters are trivially easy to kill because they usually have between, say, like 7 and 9k HP. So keep that in mind. Next up, we have to talk about Remnant Violet. Because Touch of Chaos's seal applies before damage is dealt, that means it will still go off even if the actual attack misses. All you have to do is simply seal Remnant Violet, wait for his next turn to pass, and the dodge buff will fall off, which means he's super, super easy for almost anyone to actually kill. And the final one that I want to talk about isn't truly a great matchup, but it is one that is becoming more and more common because of how prevalent this character is in the meta, and that is Apocalypse Ravi. Obviously, Apocalypse Ravis usually are going to end up playing Crimson Seed, so it is difficult to actually keep a seal on her. So for that reason, I highly recommend making sure that you can put more debuffs on her. But if you do manage to keep her sealed, she will take far less turns since she no longer has the CR push on the S2 passive, and she will not be gaining back a ton of health each time you attack her. That means it is going to be very manageable, I feel like, for many players to actually stack up a ton of damage and get her off the board relatively quickly. Again, not the best matchup, but still one that is very, very manageable. Finally, let's talk about the 4 really bad matchups that this character has, starting with the worst one, and that is versus Rowana. I would argue that the Archdemon versus Rowana matchup is worse than the Seaside Bellona versus Rowana matchup, and that says quite a lot. Rowana has an S2 passive, Vigilant Eye, that will heal her team as well as combat readiness push her team anytime an enemy uses a counterattack, dual attack, or extra attack. And if you've been paying attention throughout this video, you'll recognize that's the only thing that Archdemon Shadow does. She only counters, she only dual attacks, she only extra attacks. So you will keep the enemy team constantly at full health. And I know what some of you are probably thinking. Why don't I just seal the Rowana and, turn off Vigilant Eye? That might work. However, the character is usually built with a ton of effect resistance, so she's difficult to actually land seal on. And if you actually want to raise the effectiveness to a level that can consistently land it on Rowana, you probably have drastically impacted your matchups across the board, and therefore your Archdemon is probably no good. You would have done better simply just banning the Rowana. And even if that was the case, where you could get a high effectiveness Archdemon that didn't really lose out on other stats, it doesn't change the fact that Rowana's artifact is usually Stella Harpa. Stella Harpa will basically cleanse the seal as soon as it's applied. You will put down seal, then actually land the Touch of Chaos, which will proc Stella Harpa, remove the seal you literally just put on, but because you've already attacked a sealed unit, you'll activate burst and therefore heal and combat readiness push the team. It's a really bad matchup and one I highly recommend you avoid. Speaking of other matchups to avoid, Little Queen Charlotte is not exactly a great matchup either. Her S3, the Will of Lemaire, will most likely one-shot you regardless of how tanky your Archdemon is. If the Charlottes of today can actually one-shot Apocalypse Ravis, I don't think there is much hope for however you build your Archdemon Shadow. Next up is Green Violet. He, as we discussed previously in the video, does not actually have a real passive. His S3 has a pseudo passive that gives him a dodge chance, so you cannot really do anything. Even if you seal him, he still has the dodge chance. He still will actually counter you with his S1. And since you have a ton of AoEs, that's usually what he's going to do. He's going to get a bunch of combat readiness, a bunch of focus, and fire off a bunch more S3s than you would like, and basically take your team out as a result. Lastly, we have to talk about Last Rider Crow. Last Rider Crow is a character that is usually faster than Archdemon Shadow, which means he will get up immunity on his entire team quickly. And from there, you're going to be spamming AoEs trying to remove the immunity from him so you can land a seal, all the while he's stacking up his S3 mobilized weapon Siegfried. You'll just end up giving him a ton of AoE damage for your team and a ton of shields for his team. Even on the Iala Violin, it is such a pain to keep this character sealed. I really think that it is a bad matchup, and it's one I think you should probably avoid. And that is going to do it for the how to play on a Meru. Sorry that it took me so long to get to this one. It's been a busy holiday season and I have been feeling under the weather a lot lately, so I hope you'll forgive me. Let me know down in the comments below if I missed anything on this video or if you would like to see a specific character in the future. If you'd like to check out more how to play videos like the ones in this style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Have a good one now.